In 2003, the American Film Institute named Darth Vader as the third greatest villain in movie history, right after Hannibal Lecter and Norman Bates. Yet anyone who is a fan of Star Wars knows that the young Darth Vader was the energetic child Anakin Skywalker. It was his desire for power that got the best of him. He wanted to rule the galaxy, and that's what drew him into the dark side. He was a child filled with goodness, yet he was transformed into evil. What is so interesting is that Darth Vader's journey to the dark side was not an absolute plunge into the abyss, but a very slow and incremental journey. So, why seemingly good people become evil is certainly a frequent theme of our popular American culture. Alexander Solzhenitsyn once said that the line separating good and evil passes not through states, nor between classes, nor between political parties either, but right through the human heart. And Gandhi once stated, "The only devils in this world are those running around in our own hearts, and that's where the battles should be fought." Now, Star Wars endures as one of the greatest stories told in the 20th century because it's the classic journey of our struggle to fulfill our destiny amidst the battle of good and evil. And what makes these movies so great is not their fantastic setting or characters, but the moral dimension. In those films, the battle between good and evil is not one that just happens outside of us amongst the stars. Star Wars happens inside of us. The war is in each one of us. It's about stepping into the light and out of darkness. In today's gospel, this first Sunday of Lent, there's a war going on within Jesus. He is being tempted to step out of the light and into the darkness. And every single Lent, the first Sunday, is the temptations of Jesus. So Lent reminds us that the battle against evil begins in each one of our own hearts. So we must always be on guard because very few people plunge into darkness. But like Anakin Skywalker, it's a very slow, incremental journey. We somehow seem to lose sight of the good. And for many complicated reasons, we fall into darkness. Our God is certainly aware of our humanness. Our God gives us free will to make choices. And Lent reminds us that we must constantly be aware of our choices. We must always be reflecting on our choices. Lent is a good time to look at what's deepest in our hearts and to strengthen us with God's grace, to fight the battles of our humanness and our imperfections. The great writer Eugene O'Neill once said that we are born broken and in need of glue. And the glue that he writes about, we as believers experience as God's grace. This Lenten season is the perfect opportunity for each one of us to really access God's grace. Not to give something up, but to access God's grace, to look deep into our hearts and to root out the selfishness, the greed, the anger, the resentment that can lead any of us into the dark side. Now, in our world today, it certainly seems to me at times that the dark side so often begins with our careless words. It seems to me that this Lenten season, our world would be an incredibly better place if we gave up some of the words that we speak and some of the words that we write. The human tongue and the human hand can create such evil. We've certainly all heard the old adage, if you can't find anything nice to say about someone, don't say anything at all. Well, in a recent article for Salon.com, Lauren Daisley tried to follow that advice for a month. She titled her article, "My Month of No Snark." Now, snark is a slang word that combines snide and remark and refers to sarcastic comments. She wrote, "It started when my husband, baby, and I drove away from a visit with my aunt who has stage 4 cancer. I thought back on the 30-some years I've known her. I've never once in all that time heard her say anything unkind, not even in the subtext of her words. So I began to wonder, how would holding my tongue, or at least changing what came off of it, alter my relationships?" Well, that's when she began her month-long campaign to practice kindness in her speech. And she discovered that it's not very easy to live without snark. She wrote, "It's so much cooler to be more sarcastic. It says, I am so above this scene, above other people even." After her month-long experiment, she concluded, kindness of speech doesn't have to imply repression. It doesn't rein in humor or impede the fight for justice. But it does require discipline and substantive engagement with others. So, rather than giving something up like candy, perhaps during the Lenten season, each one of us can listen more and talk less. Maybe during the Lenten season, we can focus on being more positive with our words than negative. Maybe during our Lenten season, we can become more aware of how hurtful our words can be and seriously reflect on what we are going to say before we create chaos for those around us. If you ever read some of the comments that follow the articles on Syracuse.com, they can be exceptionally vicious and mean and humiliating and hurtful. It's amazing the venom that people spew in the written and spoken word. It can be evil, and it can lure the speaker or the writer closer and closer to the dark side. We certainly only need to listen to CNN or read Twitter during the election season to get an understanding of the vitriolic nature of the whole campaign. Or what about the bullying that goes on with our young people? Bonnie Miller Rubin wrote this in the Chicago Times recently. Teenage gossip, always hurtful, but once it was limited to just note passing and phone calls and scrawls on bathroom walls, is so much more pervasive and vicious than ever thanks to the internet. One Highland Park, Illinois girl, now a senior in high school, said that as an 8th grader, she was the subject of an online rumor that she had slept with the football team. I think it was started by the ex-girlfriend of a boy on the team, but it didn't matter where it came from, she said. People just want to believe it, and there was no way to refute it. I wanted to kill myself. The tongue and the written word are powerful weapons. I think we all know that our world is filled with snark, whether it's idle criticism or vicious gossip or actually bearing false witness against somebody. The tongue and the written word can kill. You see, evil begins in the human heart. It can flow through our words, flow through our pens. And as students of history, we know that that creates violence and war. So each one of us must take the responsibility for what is in our hearts, what comes out in our words and out through our pens. In the gospel this weekend, the first Sunday of Lent, Jesus was able to avoid giving into temptations because he was filled with God's grace. Well, God's grace is available to each one of us to avoid these kinds of temptation. Darth Vader's journey to the dark side begins by seemingly innocence, but each misstep piles up, and his descent into darkness comes from the accumulation of his choices, which culminates in his betrayal of the Jedi. So here we are at the beginning of our Lenten season, a time to reflect on our choices. Perhaps this Lent, rather than giving something up, we can reflect upon the words we use and the words we write, because words hurt. And words can drain us of our energy and make us feel diminished as human beings. The tongue and the written word are powerful weapons. Jesus had choices to make in that desert. He chose not to give in to temptation. The grace that was available to him is available to you and me. Let us access this grace this Lenten season. Perhaps talk less and listen more, to root out the snark in our own lives. Lent is a wonderful opportunity to do battle with that which lurks in each one of our hearts.